There were shouts of people everywhere about the fire and the need to get Mrs. Euclid out of the burning building. Suddenly, Urania, Count Vincent's eldest daughter, came out, helping Mrs. Euclid out. But her parents hovered over the poor girl with intimidating smiles, as if expressing their devious thoughts. With an uncomprehending face, Urania stared at the greenish-yellow liquid her parents held out. Her mother had said it would take away her sight and her voice would wither. In return for saving Mrs. Euclid, Urania must now become a cripple. After rumors spread, the protagonist's father decides to marry her off to the son of the rescued mistress, whose name was Cassius. After Duke Euclid's family agreed to the proposal, they played a wedding. And a year later, Urania received a letter from her father, telling her about the destruction of a protective artifact in a cave beneath the duchy. She didn't want to let her parents down, so she carried out the order. Cassius held her hand, yelling at her about what she had done and how she could do such a thing. Because of her actions, the monsters broke through the defense barrier and invaded the Empire. After that, the protagonist became known as the unfortunate villain Urania and was imprisoned in a tower. She could not believe that she had been used and betrayed by her own parents, especially after performing such a horrible and unforgivable crime at their behest. Her heart hated those who had driven her to such a life. She realized that she shouldn't have drank that liquid, but it was too late. Urania had been lied to about the potion only temporarily depriving her of her sight and voice. It was actually the poisonous herb parak that had caused her last days. The thought crossed her mind of what she would do if given a second chance. Urania already knew that she would disobey those who had betrayed her before and start a new quiet life. It seemed to be the end, but as if hearing her words, she was given a second chance. Urania woke up on a soft and warm bed. She experienced the familiar feeling she had after the wedding. She realized that she was in her room and the fateful moment was still 4 months away. Pretty soon she would have to do all the things she had done in her previous life again. She didn't understand at all how it had happened. As absurd as it all sounded, the thought came into her mind that God himself had heard her prayers, but her musings were interrupted by a dirty and wet rag hitting her face. It was done by her maid Talia, who was constantly taunted because of the blindness of the Duchess that Urania was. The maid held her hands while yelling about it being time to wash and go to bed. Because Urania had not spent the night with the Duke, Talia did not recognize her as the mistress she should be faithfully serving. But suddenly, a red-haired maid burst into the room. She said that the Duke had returned from the campaign and had just arrived in the capital. Even if they start preparing for his arrival now, they still won't have time. After all, he will arrive at Amon Manor in 4 days. Urania's father had ordered her to withhold the potion before going into the cave so that her eyesight would recover a bit. That was when she destroyed the protective artifact, causing the monsters to breach the barrier and fill the Empire. But she wouldn't do that this time. Unfortunately, she had become addicted to the potion. But even if she stopped taking it, it wouldn't help her regain her voice and sight, because it required a special yang plant. The problem was that only Qin, her family's personal physician, knew the recipe for the antidote. Urania decided not to think about that for now. She decided that she wanted to escape from the manor she lives in. If her husband found out that she had been deceiving him, she would be in trouble. She confidently decided that they needed to get a divorce before the truth was revealed, and everything happened as it had in her previous life. 2 days later, the Duke arrived, which made everyone hurry, for he arrived ahead of schedule. Urania hadn't taken the potion for a few days, so she vaguely distinguished the movements of the servants. Before she knew it, the Duke was already in the manor. All the servants bowed to him. Cassius adjusted his dark gloves and looked arrogantly at Urania. He wondered if she had heard that he had returned, or if she just didn't have time to hide in her room. Urania silently walked over to him and bowed. It was hard to guess from Cassius's face whether he liked it or not. His face probably didn't express anything. She thought she should have greeted him more gently, since they were husband and wife. But Cassius's face took on a mocking look, and he told her over her nightie she should dress more decently. He wanted to know why she was shaking so much, and if she was glad he was coming. Urania couldn't find the dress, for unfortunately, she couldn't see anything. He asked the question again, only this time if she was scared of him. Before she could do anything, he turned around and threw a phrase about how he didn't even have time for her tears. Urania looked down sadly and uncertainly as the maid asked what she was doing there. Talia grabbed the protagonist's hand and bowed before the Duke, asking for forgiveness and punishment. Cassius saw her touch his wife and asked how dare she treat Urania like that, throwing a dismissive look. Urania pulled out her hand, which had red marks on it. It was as if she was showing with her whole appearance how hurt she was that her husband was paying attention. Talia frightenedly replied as she gently held her, after which she bowed in front of the protagonist, but she didn't need it at all. If Talia continued, Urania would not be in a good position. She walked over to Cassius and smiled gently. The protagonist decided to take the initiative and become a caring wife that welcomes her beloved husband. Cassius was surprised, for he thought that she could hardly stand on her feet. For some reason, she felt like taking his hand with hers, which she did. He had a large palm. Cassius looked away, for he was shocked. He said he had noticed the girl's sudden change, but he hadn't expected her to lose her fear. He was indeed right, for she was no longer afraid of anything because she had managed to die. She gestured on his hand that she wanted to see the night glade he was talking about. He took his hand away and asked what she was up to, but then the butler of Amon Manor, Gale Desmond, appeared, greeting his master with a welcome back. He was the only one who treated Urania well, and she wondered if he had accomplished what she had asked. The Duke went first, telling the others to return to their rooms and that business would be taken care of tomorrow. Gale did what she asked, so the road to Lake Perak was almost completely cleared. However, they could not go deep into the forest, for that was forbidden. But then the Duke intervened in their conversation, asking about the lake. Urania looked at him, and Cassius asked why she wanted it. She took his hand again and wrote there that she had heard of his return, which was the reason why she had ordered the road to be cleared of snow. After all, he was tired and would definitely want to rest there. He was surprised, for how could she know about the lake? Urania replied that he often goes there. In fact, the lake is known for the Perak herb, and a poisonous plant that has healing properties in the water. Cassius, who often wields a sword, goes there all the time. He incredulously asked again how she knew this. The girl's mother had told her about him, to which the Duke had replied that she should forget about him. But she did not give up and asked him to take her to the lake. He menacingly asked when she had learned to be so intrusive and said that she had outstayed her patience. She grew sad, and the Duke still decided to take her there. But if the girl got cold, he would not carry her back. The red-haired maid reappeared and brought a cloak for her mistress. After that, they went to the lake. Cassius asked if it was okay for her to walk, since she was wearing shoes that were not appropriate for the weather, looking at her cute house slippers. The girl tried to find the right shoes, but couldn't. Looking at his back, she remembered that in her past life, she used to hide when she heard about him. They hadn't socialized at all, for Urania was afraid the deception would be exposed. But now she wanted to divorce him, so they needed to at least talk first. She touched his back and he asked her what was wrong. She wanted to talk to him, using her hand, but it was uncomfortable with gloves on. Cassius offered to carry her and said that was a great idea. After saying that, he lifted her up with one hand. The girl enjoyed the outdoors. She had asked to be carried, of course, but now she felt ashamed. She thought it was hard for him to carry her with one arm. She thought it would make him feel better if she hugged him. But he only asked what she was doing. He looked at her red eyes and said that she was acting as if she could clearly see him. Urania hastily looked away, for he must not know about her sight returning. He gently lowered her to the ground and asked again why she wanted to come here so much. The girl replied that they had never spent their first night together. Even if she planned to divorce him, to do so, she needed to consolidate her power in the duchy and prove that they were a real couple. She asked that he didn't leave her, to preserve a modicum of her honor. He asked with a disappointed look how she could talk about honor. She was called a blind and dumb duchess, so she was an eyesore to Duke Cassius. He asked with a smile why someone like her would need honor, to which she replied brightly, saying that she was human too. He doubted that was the point. She continued to amaze him, for such a frail body to be held in such coldness. She immediately turned away, for the man had removed the top of his clothes. The girl had forgotten that he came here to bathe. She tried to pull herself together, and guessed that if there was a parakeet growing here, there would be an antidote for it somewhere. She glanced at him and wondered if he was cold. He plunged into the water, but it had been a minute. She panicked because he wouldn't come up and tried to call out to him, but it was only an unintelligible sound. 5 minutes passed and still no sign of him. She thought that something was obviously wrong here. She took off her cloak and jumped into the water. It wasn't until after she jumped that she remembered that a person who didn't have magic would immediately die. When she was 10 years old, she was at a funeral, and that's when she first met Cassius. His father, the previous Duke Euclid, had died in the war. It was clear to everyone that his son was in pain, but they didn't say anything. The little girl was already saddened by it even then. She prayed to herself to keep him in the water, but suddenly the air left her. He saw this and immediately swam up to her to lift her to the surface. The girl opened her eyes and saw the same washcloth on her face again. Standing in the room was Talia, her maid. She knew for sure something was going to happen and asked how Urania had fallen into the water. She immediately remembered that she had jumped in to save Cassius, but now she wondered what had happened to him and if he was alive. The maid answered that the Duke was very wet, for he had had to jump in after her. The girl calmed down, for he was fine. Talia started to rub her skin with a rag, but Urania threw it away. Talia was puzzled and said that she had slept for 2 days. The girl couldn't believe her words. She touched her forehead and felt the heat. She was lucky to be alive at all, after that lake. The maid handed her a glass of potion. The girl would recognize the color and stench anywhere, for it was a decoction of the parak her father had sent. She turned away, for she didn't want to drink it, but Talia grabbed her face and wanted to force it into her mouth. But she failed. The Duke came into her room and asked what was wrong. The maid replied that the mistress needed to drink medicine and she refused. Cassius looked at his wife and told Talia to leave. She wanted to object, but ended up complying with the order. The girl's vision had recovered some more, and now she could see his face better. The Duke asked why she had jumped. Urania didn't answer anything. He then took her hand and asked her to answer his question. She, with the help of her hand, replied that she was glad he was all right. The man asked if she dived after him. Urania nodded her head, meaning yes. The Duke asked if she was in her right mind, because she should have known it was dangerous to dive in there. He asked her not to do it again, for that time was enough for him. She didn't know if he was mad. If he was, she should apologize. He moved closer to her and she hugged him, meaning sorry. He was surprised. His arms tensed and he wondered what she was doing. He didn't understand how she could act like this at all. He threw the plaid over her. She wondered why, and then she saw her appearance, which made her blush. The Duke took the bell, and then Talia immediately appeared. He asked if the doctor had written recommendations for treatment, for in the lake she might have ingested the herb parak and needed to take an infusion of the white herb. Talia replied that they were not done yet. The protagonist was glad because the white herb was the yang herb. That is the herb that would help her recover. He said to carry the medicine when ready, but not to make her take it anymore. The maid replied that she would do so. The Duke also reminded the maid that if she risked humiliating his wife, she would humiliate him as well. The girl was shocked that Cassius took her side. Had he really listened to her words? The maid asked if she should call for Opelia. The girl nodded, and the maid replied that it would be done. This maid's name is Lena. She is a kind girl. She took care of Urania despite Talia's intrigues. Even when I was locked in the tower, she was the only one who continued to communicate with me. Lena returned with another maid. Her name was Opelia. The protagonist looked at them with a gentle and slightly sly smile. She needs allies. Opelia is the wife to a baron who was stripped of her title. She was originally a personal servant of Cassius's mother, so if the protagonist made her an ally, she could replace Talia. The girl asked if she had recently lost a child. The servant girl didn't know how the mistress knew about it. In fact, the girl was told by Lena while she was in the tower. The protagonist will help her find her child, and she will also allow them both to live in the manor. But in return, the maid must do her a favor. Opelia couldn't believe what she heard. She began to thank the mistress. The maid will have to keep an eye on Talia. If she does something strange, Opelia should report to the girl at once. While the protagonist is still the wife of Duke Euclid, she will take full advantage of it. And so the day came when a single letter destroyed her past life. Because of the order, the Duke will be delayed at a festival in the capital. This is the perfect time to sneak into the duchy's cave and destroy the protective artifact at the behest of Urania's father. The protagonist has decided that she will no longer follow the mistakes of the past. It would be better to become the shadow of the Duke than the Foundation to sign her own death warrant. The girl was glad that she had finally gone against the Count, for the first time in 20 years. Her face glowed with happiness and pride. She realized that it was better to die in battle than to become her father's puppet. Now, thanks to the white grass, her sight and voice had returned, but she would not be able to deceive the Duke for long. The protagonist is clearly determined to recover, get a divorce, and escape. If her husband finds out about everything, it will turn into a tragedy, which she cannot allow. The girl decided to write a letter. She believed that the recipient would definitely be able to find a great doctor. She handed the letter to Opalia and asked that she send the letter in secret. The addressee was Sade Sade. Eventually, the letter arrived in the recipient's hands. A man with brown hair asked what the interesting letter was. A second man, on the other hand, with a tuft on his head and dark hair, scrutinized the letter. The girl received a reply saying that her every whim would be at her great expense. She was annoyed. Lena entered the room and told her that Opalia had been reunited with her child, and she relayed that her request would be honored to the best of her ability. Urania's voice was still not very good, but her sight was almost back, and soon she would be able to bring up the subject of divorce. In this life, her husband didn't go to the capital like before. She thought it was because of the camping trip to the lake. She knows that this life will already go differently than before. The protagonist was greeted by the servants. She was shocked, for she had never been greeted by servants before. She wondered what had happened to them. Lena replied that the Duke had summoned everyone and ordered them to treat her with respect. She was surprised to hear that Cassius had done that. Lena began to remember and say how cool the Duke looked when he pulled her out of the water and brought her to the manor. According to the maid, she had seen him so excited for the first time. The Duke appeared and said that he had not authorized her to come out. He also asked for an explanation. Urania wondered if he was angry with her. The girl couldn't believe that the Duke was like that according to the maid, so she thought that Lena had mixed up something. The girl almost believed it. She handed the piece of paper to the Duke. The Duke took it and read it, then asked if she wanted to divorce him. The girl nodded her head, and the Duke told her to follow him. She was glad, for she thought he wanted to sign all the papers at once. She looked at the maid, but she only hesitantly called her mistress. The girl couldn't keep up with the Duke, so the maid held her back. Lena asked him to walk not so fast. He stopped and turned back to them. Cassius said with a stern expression, since she hadn't recovered yet, why was she walking around and also offering a divorce? It was the only way she could go on with her life. With a smile on her face, she looked at him, causing him to be a bit perplexed. She wanted to do like last time, just hug him. But he didn't understand her motives at all. His short-sightedness made her feel uncomfortable. The Duke said she was trying to embarrass him again. He thought she was doing all this on purpose. The girl shook her head negatively. She was already tired of it herself. If someone made her husband change his mind, then everything she did would be for nothing. He didn't look happy either. He grabbed her arm and suddenly lifted her up. She wrapped her arms around his neck to make it more comfortable. The Duke wondered why, if she hugged him so confidently, she was afraid. Was she afraid he would drop her? He told the maid to leave them. After that, they left. The Duke admitted that he was cold to her. But she should also understand him, for she had been avoiding him forever. At this moment, he sat down beside her, which made her a little embarrassed. The man said again that she had changed, and asked if all that was needed now was an annulment. He said that she was now no longer afraid of him at all, and tried as if to scare her. She realized that the divorce had hit him hard. She thought the tea was warm, but it was hot. He handed her a handkerchief and asked if she had burned herself. Her eyes met his gaze, but she pushed him away. She didn't want to push him away, and she had really burned herself. He didn't understand her at all, for she didn't like to complain, constantly asking for a hug, and even jumped the lake for him. He took out a not large box and handed it to her. It is the family treasure of his family, and now she has to wear it in society. She was shocked again, for it was as if the divorce had been forgotten. She wanted him to give her his hand because she had something to say. But he just turned his back and walked away, throwing last words about the responsibility of the Duchess and that he would live up to her expectations. The girl realized that it wasn't going to be that simple. She opened the box and saw there a beautiful blue necklace, which is called the Waves of Memories. Since it was the symbol of the duchy, she wouldn't dream of divorce. Divorces and marriages were commonplace. Rather, even long and strong marriages were rare. He hardly cared for his reputation. She wondered if he blamed himself for her saving his mother and losing her sight and voice. But now she faced another question: what to do with the necklace now? If she sold it, she would make a comfortable living for the rest of her days. But she would not do that, because life was more precious to her. Now she will try to assuage Cassius's guilt. The morning begins with the fact that the protagonist asks the maid where the Duke is. But the one replied that she does not know, and others have not seen him either. She got upset, and the maid noticed it, so she said that the counselor must know where he is. Urania went in search of the counselor. Unfortunately, the girl couldn't find him. She is not going to sit idly by. Thanks to the yang herb, her eyesight is fully restored, but her voice is not there yet. But now she is ready to move on to the next step. She called for the butler and handed him a piece of paper that said to prepare to leave. Since she couldn't find the Duke, she would go look for the cure. The butler replied that they would leave immediately after reporting to the Duke, but he must not find out about it. She thought that if he found out, something would definitely go wrong. She gestured for him to turn the note over. It said that she knew what Gale, the butler, did in the mornings. His face flushed a little, and he couldn't believe how his mistress knew about it. Every morning he sits down to write stories about men. In fact, she had only recently found out about it, because his messenger pigeon had accidentally flown into her room. She doesn't mind his hobby, but servants are forbidden to do anything but service, so now she will be able to manage him. She offered to do each other a favor and keep quiet about the incident. The butler was glad, and he began the preparations. He would also report back to her when they went. After a while, they finally arrived. Urania knew he had to be here somewhere. Gale asked if they needed to go further, but she gestured that they didn't. They didn't need to do that, as the one she was looking for was already here. It was the same man with dark hair that she had sent the letter to. His name was Sade, and he was the head of the mercenaries. He recognized her immediately, for she was the Duchess of Euclid. And coincidentally, it was her longtime childhood friend who died before she did. After she destroyed the artifact, a hole appeared in the barrier, and monsters came through it. The Empire didn't have enough men to handle them all, so they wanted to use mercenaries. However, the mercenary guild had inflated the prices, and he was the one responsible. It was because of this that her childhood friend was killed by her husband. Sade playfully touched her forehead and said that she had promised to marry him as a child, but now she was someone else's wife. The protagonist, with irritation on her face, told him to back off. He called her by her shortened and affectionate nickname, Rainy, and then asked her if anything special had happened. She didn't know what he was talking about. He leaned into her ear and said something about her father. He asked if she wanted him to elaborate, but she punched him in the stomach. He bent all in feigned pain, and she responded with approval. It had been so long since he had heard her voice, he even felt like crying. The butler told her to pick another place, but suddenly there was a scream. She grabbed him by the hair. Butler had never seen such behavior before. He begged her for forgiveness and mercy, promising that he would tell her everything. She let him go at once. Suddenly, her husband appeared behind Sade, saying she had been too soft on him. He pulled his head toward him. He turned and asked if it was Duke Euclid himself. Cassius inquired what business his wife was discussing with the mercenary captain. She was surprised and approached him, asking him to let her friend go. He looked at her and turned away angrily, which surprised her even more. She wondered how he knew. After all, this is a hidden part of the guild. Even getting in here intentionally is not an easy task. Then she realized that the butler had told the Duke after all. Cassius had let Sade go. Sade said he almost ripped his head off and asked how he would make up for the damage he had done. But then he said it was just a joke. He greeted Duke and said he was honored to speak with him. He also said that he and the protagonist are childhood friends. She realized that he was just fooling around. After all, how could he communicate so easily with a war demon? Though he had always been like that. She touched her husband's arm for them to go home. He looked at her and asked again if they were friends. Sade confirmed that they were friends and that he was overreacting, for he was glad to see them. He called her by her nickname again. Her husband didn't like it, so he told him to call her Duchess. Drune apologized, saying it was a long-standing habit, for they were close friends. They got on each other's nerves. If her husband wasn't going to leave so easily, then she needed to deal with her friend. She pointed 2 fingers at him, which meant to get him out of here. He remembered the childhood traumatizing experience of her poking her fingers into his eyes. He didn't want to relive that again, so he hurriedly left, saying he remembered an important matter. Cassius told them to get out of here. He gazed at the way she was smiling and asked if she was glad he had found her. To assuage his guilt, she would need to show him a little more kindness. She asked how he knew about it. He replied that he needs to know everything the girl does. If she keeps hiding things from him, he won't be able to stay at her side. She wrote on his hand that she wanted to go for walks sometimes. He let her, and she realized that she shouldn't be ashamed to talk to him. Sitting in her room, she looked at the whistle he had put on her as they rode in the carriage. Then she touched his jacket and wished he would take it off. He did so and said that this was how he wished they could always communicate like this. She noticed his wound on his arm and took out a tissue and applied it to the wound. After regaining her sight, she began to see magical shadows around people. Each shadow has a specific shape and size. She doesn't know what it is, but she noticed a shadow under his arm in the mercenary guild. She also smelled the odor of blood. She thought that maybe it was something special that her friend was talking about. He asked why she had come here, and also immediately held out his hand for her to answer. She said they hadn't seen each other in a while, and he was her childhood friend. He didn't want her to draw so much attention to herself, for it was better not to give any reason for gossip. She replied that he was often involved in such things himself. Cassius was rumored to be involved with women. Whenever he shows up at an event, it's full of gossip of all sorts. She thinks it's because she's not worthy of such a duke. But he interrupts her thoughts by saying he is disgusted by such things. The gifted whistle is for her to call out to someone. To use it, she just had to press her lips together and blow gently. They were so close that it made her embarrassed. She wrote her thanks on his hand before falling asleep on his shoulder on the way to the manor. He quietly said that he would do anything for her. Her maid Ophelia came to her room, which meant she was up to the task and was able to find out about Talia. After a while, Talia came to her again and started complaining that she had gone somewhere and thus made life difficult for everyone. The girl handed over a piece of paper, and it said that she was interested in how she was handling her money. The maid hesitantly replied that it was her job, and she was doing just fine on her own. Suddenly, the protagonist finally spoke and ordered her to show her the spending accounts and her savings. The maid was puzzled, for she had no idea how Urania was able to speak. The girl replied that her voice had returned, but not completely, so she preferred to remain silent for now. The maid wondered why she hadn't told the Duke about it. The girl covered herself by saying that if it was temporary, she would only upset him. Talia said she obliged, but the girl interrupted her. She replied confidently that she was now deciding who and what was obligated. Talia's face contorted in anger. She definitely didn't like the answer. The protagonist again told her to bring her the bills, but the maid replied that she had lost them. The maid decided to admit her guilt, so she started begging her mistress to forgive her, because she had squandered all the money. And it wasn't even winter. She replied that she had spent it on developing the garden, for Urania's body had not yet recovered. So she bought the most expensive plants, whose fragrances were good for health. Her excuse was meaningless, because she planted flowers for the Duchess who can't even see. She just stole the money and shared it with someone. She couldn't believe that a maid was able to squander the yearly budget of the largest duchy in the empire. She told the maid to go up, and the maid asked if she was forgiven or not. The protagonist guesses that the maid didn't do it for herself, as she is loyal to the Duke. The only reason she despises the girl is that in her eyes, Urania dishonors the Duke. Ophelia's report stated that Talia had met with one man. He was Euclid's guardian. He was known for his unraveled hands, which was the reason they might have been bound. The Duke entered the room and asked what they were doing here. Upon seeing him, she immediately averted her gaze. The man said that sometimes he felt that she could see him. After all, she looks at him and then looks away in fear. He asked if it seemed to him to which the protagonist only smiled innocently. He turned his gaze to the maid who was on her knees. She started to justify herself and said not to blame the mistress. And the Duke corrected her and said that Urania was not guilty of anything, and no one had the right to blame her. He did not interfere with them and left. The protagonist lies on her bed in contemplation. If she keeps looking straight at the Duke, one day he'll realize everything. And if something goes wrong, he might even kill her, for she has disgraced his family. She saw a bird fly to the window. It was a letter from her friend. It said that if the girl wanted to know about her magic, she should come back. Only his services would cost a lot. Thanks to the white grass, the protagonist's voice and her vision got better, but some problems remained. She continued to have pains all over her body and neck. In her past life, she had constant body pains and then nosebleeds. After that, other effects of the poison began to manifest and led to her demise. This is the reason why she needs Saad, because she won't find a decent doctor. While the servants were resting, she decided to go into the butler's office, but it was locked. She used a stiletto and opened the door. After a while, the butler came in. He was surprised to see her in the study. He said that if something was wrong, she should have called him. She put a piece of paper on the table. It said about the changes in the garden and whether new flowers had been planted. He wasn't sure about that. She replied that she was wondering where her husband's money was being spent. The butler didn't notice anything, but then was shocked to see that her voice had returned to her. The girl didn't tell him that her sight had also returned to her. Butler apologized and said she surprised him, then congratulated her. The girl said that Talia was supposed to do the reporting, however. She said she was not in the duchy right now. The butler did not believe because the maid said that Urania personally entrusted her with the management of finances. The protagonist also asked if he would report this conversation to the Duke. The butler mumbled something as the girl picked up an obscene book. He immediately took the book and said that he would obey her. With a smile not on her face, she asked to arrange a meeting with her friend without reporting to the Duke. He said he would do so. It was time to take a bath. The water was murky and dark. It was Talia's shenanigans again. She filled the bath with poison and mud every time. Urania said she would take her bath in the lower room. Talia wanted to object, but the protagonist wouldn't budge and said she didn't like it here. While the protagonist was lounging in the bathtub, Talia was up to something again. The girl heard her voice and a man's voice. She wouldn't have time to change and hide, as her clothes were too far away. She gave the girl a sly look, and Urania realized that she was doing everything to dishonor the Duchess by showing her naked body to the servants. She ducked under the water to avoid following her lead. The girl began to run out of air, but a strong hand pulled her out and immediately put her jacket on her. It was her husband. He looked angrily at the servants and said that if any of them cared about life to look down and get out of here. The servants hurriedly left. Cassius called her not careful. She thought he was mad at her again. Suddenly her body started shaking. He saw it and turned away. She thinks he was disappointed and doesn't even want to talk to her. But she decided not to waste time and talk about divorce again. The girl touched his hand. She wondered who she was in his eyes. On his hand, she wrote that she wanted a divorce, because then he would no longer have to be angry with her. He said no. She asked if he blamed himself. He didn't understand. She replied that it happened because of her, and he shouldn't blame himself. He called her a conniving woman. Cassius told her not to bring it up again and left. She took the whistle thought into it. And the Duke turned back abruptly. He said they would never divorce. But his face changed dramatically when she finally said his name. He was surprised that she could speak, and at the fact that he could finally hear her voice. He asked if she could see him, and she said yes. He looked happy. He said he would do anything she wanted, just to get her to stop shaking. She said again about the divorce, but he interrupted her and said no divorce and Sade, her friend. She asked what her friend had to do with it. He said it had nothing to do with it. He also asked if she needed anything else, to which she replied some money. She needs to meet with Sade to find a decent doctor, and when she gets stronger, she can start a life on her own. But she needs money to do that, so she won't rush into a divorce. He asked if he gives the money, will she stop talking about divorce? The girl said yes. He wanted to get out of here, but first she needs to change her clothes. Her maid Lena came in. She asked what Urania was wearing and looked at the Duke. You could definitely tell by her look that she had it all wrong. She called out her name. The maid was pleased and surprised. She asked the Duke to come out, for her mistress wished to take a bath. The Duke turned his eyes to his wife, and the maid stood up for her. She knows they have not yet spent their first night, and said that Urania would not be comfortable with Cassius staring at her like that. The Duke was understanding about the situation. The protagonist told the maid what had happened. When they came out of the bathroom, there was a tense atmosphere. Talia was on her knees again. She excused herself again, saying that she couldn't have done it on purpose and it just happened. Duke looked angry and said she was out of line. Talia replied that the girl made it all up and is cheating. She said that Urania can talk. She also added that all this time she was pretending to be dumb and blind to do nothing, that she was just taking advantage of the Duke's kindness. The girl asked Talia if she really thought so, but the maid wasn't listening. She asked another question, if she could answer for the words that the girl was lying to everyone around her. The maid shouted again that the protagonist was up to something, but now the girl started talking about wasting the budget. She said that she found out that 30 times more was spent for the garden than what was required. Since the inspection wasn't over yet, the girl suggested to limit the maid's freedom. Talia asked to stop and she would explain everything. But the Duke ordered her to be locked up in the Eastern Tower. It was the same tower where she had been imprisoned in her past life. After such memories, she felt sick to her stomach. Lena became worried, but the Duke said to stand back. He took her in his arms. He knew now that her sight and voice had returned to her, but he didn't ask anything. She noticed her hair on his neck and tried to move it away. Their gazes met. She sharply pushed him away, calling him handsome. The Duke asked if it was a compliment. She replied that it was, and he did ask how his sight and voice had returned. She said it was all thanks to the white grass. She said that she had been told that he had brought her in his arms after she dived for him. He replied that after that incident, he began to think of her more often. She realized that he hadn't cared about her until then. Her condition wasn't the best now, and the last thing she asked before she fainted was if he had seen anything while she was in the bathroom. He waits in the room until she wakes up. He already knows he can't turn away from her. The man doesn't understand why she needs a divorce and how she brought it up so calmly, as if she was already preparing for it. He couldn't figure out if her friend had anything to do with it. They met when she came to the hospital to visit his mother. Despite her loss of voice and sight, she was radiant in her smile. He thinks he had already decided everything for himself then. Maybe because of that he was ready to marry her as her father had asked. He was originally supposed to marry either the eldest or middle daughter of Duke Herod. After Urania became his wife, she stopped smiling. She was always scared and tried to avoid him, as if she was forced to marry him. He blamed himself for that, so he tried to stay away from her. If she wants a divorce because of Sade, he won't budge. Cassius would do more for her than he would. Even though she hasn't opened up to him, love can't be earned instantly. The man ordered that the head doctor be called. When the doctor came, he ordered that she should feel better tomorrow. The morning came and she woke up. Her maid Lena was sitting beside her. She was glad her mistress was awake and gave her some medicine. As it turned out, she'd been asleep for 2 days. She couldn't believe it had been 2 whole days. She had a meeting with Sade, so she hurried up and wanted to get up. But she couldn't, and her eyes started to blur, because she wasn't well yet. Alina got worried and told her to rest. The girl decided to make an appointment for another day. The maid told her that they were now in the Duke's room, and that he was looking after her until the morning. Alina described how manly he looked as he carried Urania in his arms. The Duke had also sent money to run the estate. She looked at the chest of gold coins. That wasn't all of it yet. For the entire amount of gold, an entire estate could be built. The girl ordered Lena to put it all her vault. She began to think about how to use the money. A little later, she headed to the dining room where the Duke was already there. He asked how she was feeling. She replied that she was feeling much better already. She thanked him for sitting with her all night. The man replied that it was his duty. She said that his money would definitely do some good, but he replied that if it wasn't enough for her to tell him. The protagonist remarked how handsome he was. He also said that a duchess has responsibilities as well as privileges. He said to enjoy life, but she thinks it's all for his reputation. After all, The Duchy of Euclid is a family with a long history. Even the emperor is no match for him. That's why it was targeted by her father, Count Vincent. He wanted to make her his puppet. As the plates were being cleared away, she said she didn't want the next course. The servant replied that it would be done and said she had a beautiful voice. The Duke didn't like this, and there was a creepy atmosphere on the paddle. The servant apologized and left. She said it was better to fire Talia. The Duke agreed and said to eat more, as keeping healthy was the Duchess's main responsibility. He handed her a plate of food, and she replied that if it was her duty, she would eat it. He apologized, for he did not mean it. He asked if he had scared her when he asked her to eat more. She said no, because she hadn't eaten meat in a long time. But he actually scared her a lot. Parrot grass is very bad for digesting meat, so every time she tried to eat any meat, she felt nauseous. He said and chew thoroughly and slowly. She tasted a piece and it had a great flavor. He served another dish for her. She doesn't understand why, but she was reminded of the moment in the bathroom. Afterward, she blushed slightly. The protagonist covered her mouth, thinking about something. He thought she coughed and got worried. She replied that she just wasn't used to talking yet, and he ordered the butler to get a doctor. He wants even the slightest abnormality checked out. He put the butler in charge of her health. She thought Gale is a talent, for he works skillfully with Cassius. He asked if she liked the food. She replied that it was the first time she had eaten so much meat. She saw the brownie and took a bite. The flavor was delicious, and she really liked it. It was the first time she had tasted such pastries, for in the manor, because of her health problems, everyone was afraid to feed her sweets. Only her friend brought her cookies. Her husband didn't like the mention of Sade again. He watched her eating sweets and rang the bell. The servants brought different kinds of sweets. There was a lot of it, but it wasn't so bad anymore. And she realized that being a duchess wasn't so bad anymore. The scene unfolds in the garden. This is the alley the servants pass by. The butler handed her a pouch and told her there were cookies she could eat on the road. She thanked him. He confirmed her speculation that Talia and the guard, whose name was Gagard, sometimes met. Gerard suggested an expansion of the temple, and the butler held out the knight's ledger. The protagonist noticed that it would have cost a lot of money, but there was no spending at all. It turns out that a lot of money went into secondary income. Secondary income is the amount of money withdrawn after working on a project, and the butler said it's usually no more than 10%. That means that the gatekeeper just took the money and wrote up an accounting to keep everything legal. The butler confirmed her thoughts. He also said that Sade had arrived 5 minutes ago, and they could meet at the manor. She greeted her friend with a bright smile. He noticed that her voice had returned and how quickly it had recovered. The girl confirmed his words. He told them to get back to business, and the fact that she had wasted his precious time twice for nothing. And the third time she was late. She apologized, saying she felt sick. He leaned toward her, and she didn't realize what he wanted to do. His hand touched her cheek. He asked that she tell him what happened. The girl told him everything except going back in time. He noted that it was boring. He also noticed that a strong magical aura was wafting from her. That was what she wanted to ask, what kind of magic was in her body. He had noticed the growing power in her back when she was 12 years old. He assumed her father had done something to her. Right now, the magical power was sealed. However, it was slowly breaking out over time. She casually said that he was handsome and so smart. He wanted to say yes, but then he realized what she meant. It was like she wasn't paying attention to her own words. He said that only her father could break the seal. The protagonist remembered that when she was 12 years old, her father had brought some wizard into the house. She was uncomfortable with the sight of him, and even a little creepy. When he touched her, she felt like a part of her had vanished, and instead there was an unbearable pain that caused her to pass out. The Empire had been fighting a monster invasion for years. 30 years ago, right before the end of the war, wizards and warriors were at the very top of the hierarchy. No one could deny their importance. While warriors were easy, raising a wizard was difficult. It was after meeting a wizard that she was forbidden to leave the manor. Perhaps her father wanted to prevent her abilities from manifesting. She realized how disgusting he was. Her friend couldn't understand what could have broken the seal, for such magic could hold for hundreds of years. She assumed that it was the poison of the parrot grass that had broken the seal. That was possible. However, he said that the Duke could not help but notice the powers that grew within it. She asked how her powers could be unlocked. He replied that he knew and had already made preparations. He pulled out a bracelet and called it a valuable item. She asked how much he wanted for it. He called her blunt and said the price was 300 gold pieces. She said it was as cheap as a dress costs. She finally got a taste of wealth. He took her hands and put a bracelet on her. He also showed her what to do to hide her powers and to release them. The bracelet will stay on for a month. She doesn't want Cassius to know about her powers. Seda said to come to the capital for the feast, because the man she needs will definitely show up there. He said he would send a formal invitation to the duchy. He threw a smokescreen and said they would see each other again. The girl enjoys the sweets in her room again. In her previous life, her father had deprived her of such joy, so she was sad. The butler came in and said that the designers would be in about an hour. He also handed her another candy, saying that children liked this kind of thing. She looked at him in bewilderment. After all, she was 20 years old and of legal age. She asked if he was mocking her, but he said that when he saw the caramel, he thought of her because she liked it. He was right, for she is the youngest on the estate, not counting Opilia's child. Cassius is also quite young. He's 25. Her maid Lena is 29. All the servants are older than her because they are hired after 20. She asked how old the butler was. He replied that he was 39. Such news made her spoon fall out of her hands. She thought he was a little older than her. She asked what his secret to youth was. She assumed it was because of his hobby, but he changed the subject. He asked what to do about Talia. She said she hadn't finished her investigation yet. The butler retorted that the Duke had given the matter entirely to her. She said she wanted to meet with her. The butler asked if she would let the former maid out. Urania replied that compared to the Duke, she seemed much kinder. The butler was worried because if something happened in the tower, they would be in trouble. She said he was exaggerating. He replied that the Duke had made it clear that her safety was their vital responsibility. She started to descend the stairs. She almost fell, but one of the guards saved her. After that, she almost fell a couple more times. But she made it to the dungeon. The guard started teasing her, saying that the descent was in splendor. She was a little embarrassed, but having fun. She saw Talia sitting behind the bars. Because of her parents, she had set herself on the path of evil. But she wasn't that way originally after all. The girl asked how she was doing here. Talia lives in dirt and dust and drinks dirty water. She is living out all the things she did to the girl before. She began to beg for forgiveness and said she was forced. The girl asked who it was. She asked if it was Gerard. She looked down at the former maid from top to bottom. If she was holding out for something or someone, the girl needed to break her first, and she knew how to do that. She ordered Talia to be let out. She finally went outside. The girl told her to take a bath, and then they would chat over a cup of tea. Talia replied that she would not forget her kindness, but the girl would never forget the stench of the dirty water and the rags, and how the servants visited her while she was bathing. She ordered the butler to guard the bathroom and not let her escape. The other servants didn't understand what the mistress was up to either. The main character didn't want to just let her go. Talia ran out naked, her whole body burning with itching. She thinks the girl wants revenge on her. Urania's maids answered that she yelled something about the slop ran away as soon as she saw the water. The protagonist wanted to talk to her after taking a bath, but she's not in the right state of mind right now, so she decided to wait for her to come to her senses. Urania sits in the room and realizes that Gerard used Talia. She doesn't have the rights to question Euclid's guards properly. The Duchess can handle the internal affairs of the manor, but the Order of Knights is under the Duke's authority. At this time, the designers from the atelier arrived. Two girls called Sasha and Mina entered the room. The girls immediately noticed the beauty of the Duchess. Sasha demonstrated the already finished outfits and asked if she wanted to try them on. The heroine said to show her the best of them. There wasn't much time left before the party, and she had nothing ready from the outfits. She wanted to make arrangements with a prestigious atelier in the capital, but they were swamped with orders. Instead, she called Sasha, the owner of a sewing shop on the edge of the capital. Their dresses are overly flashy, so they are not particularly popular with sophisticated ladies' circles. But there is no dress code at the event. After a pile of tried-on outfits, the girl was tired and offered to rest, as well as to drink tea. Lena got worried and asked if their dresses were heavy for her, but Sasha replied that their dress was the lightest in town. The Duchess said to get a servant who looked like her. After that, Sasha showed off a bunch of dresses, asking for her opinion. This was the first time she was choosing a dress for herself. They looked identical to her. Lena couldn't believe it was her first time. The girl replied that usually her mom bought the clothes, or she would finish her sister's dresses, as she was growing faster. The maid offered to go shopping for her. The girl didn't mind, because she wanted to start living in a new way. Lena showed her open clothes. This embarrassed the girl. The maid replied to get closer to the Duke. They should spend the first night in the best way possible. The maid started fooling around and giving advice. Urania involuntarily remembered something she didn't want to remember. That same night, the butler had set up a device, a communication so that she could talk to the Duke. It was awkward for the girl, but she decided to try to do something about it. They spoke at the same time. The Duke asked how she was feeling. She said they needed to talk about something. She knows he's been worrying too much about her the last few days, but there's no way she can figure out what the reason is. When she suggested a divorce, he reacted strangely. Judging from the servants' reactions, they thought so too. She asked him to order the people accompanying her out of the room. He replied that it was impossible, for they were responsible for her safety while he was not around. And they would answer with their lives if a single hair fell from her head. The Duke apologized, for he had to go. Some strange feeling settled in her thoughts. In the garden, she was basking in the taste of sweets. The servants were near her and asked if she liked the tea and dress. The protagonist thought it was funny because how quickly the attitudes of those who had recently mocked her had changed. Ophelia came in. The girl was pleased with her. She ordered that everyone but Lena was leaving. The girl knew that rumors would soon spread that the Duchess had kicked out all the servants, leaving only them. And it would become known that she trusted only them. The protagonist asked how her child was doing. The servant replied that it was fine. She wanted the servant's trust, namely loyalty, when serving one's master is the purpose of one's life. She put Ophelia in charge of the maids. She wanted to object, but the girl said it was her personal errand and asked if the job was easy for her. It was different when she couldn't speak or see, but now she had the power to make her own decisions. The maid said yes. Urania said that if anyone disagreed with the decision, Ophelia could punish them. Lena brought her cold tea, but it was lukewarm, for she cares too much for the girl. The girl's hands were shaking so much that she might drop the cup at any moment. The symptoms have started to get worse. She needs to heal completely before her husband finds out anything. Today at the party, the protagonist must definitely meet with the healer. In the carriage, the girl talked to her maid, Lena, who was disguised as a man. She tried to reassure her that everything will be fine, and no one will notice that she is actually a girl. But the maid was worried that the Duke would find out. Urania replied that nothing will happen, because no one will tell him. She has even arranged with the butler not to tell him anything. This is the sparsely populated outskirts of the capital. She asked her friend to find a carriage where she could ride safely, for she couldn't go to the party in the Duke's carriage. They quickly made their way through the magic portal. But suddenly, the protagonist saw Cassius. He noticed her too and was surprised. An eerie atmosphere gathered around him as he looked at her. The girl decided to hurriedly get into the carriage and drive on. But no sooner had she done so than she heard a question as to what she was doing here. The man was already beside her. She answered that she had come to see him. His look expressed disbelief at her words. He replied that she was just being sly, for she would not wear such a dress to see him. It seemed to her that he didn't like her outfit. She asked what was wrong with the dress, since everyone had told her how beautiful it was. He told her to go to the townhouse and wait for him there. After all, it was dangerous to be alone here. The girl replied that she had an important meeting and would come a little later. The man said that she had not come to see him. She interrupted him and replied that there was no need to jump to conclusions. In fact, she was on her way to a party, but decided to make a stop to meet him. With her dress, she wanted to emphasize her status as the Duke's wife, and this way she could blend into society more successfully. He was worried about her health. She reassured him and told him that she would have a chaperone with her. He spotted Lena and immediately revealed their plan. He thought she had such a strange hobby. He suggested that perhaps it was his wife's hobby. The girl replied that she was the one who asked her maid to change into men's clothes. She could not go with another man. He asked if she had no suitable partner. But then his subordinate arrived on horseback and said that there were signs of stalking. He replied that it was likely that she had been tried to be attacked. He told her to be more careful and to keep the guards closer to the carriage or inside. When she is near Cassius, her heart beats so fast, causing her to lose her strength faster than usual. Sade wrote her a letter saying that he would recognize her at first sight, especially since she has a pretty noticeable hair color. That color only accounts for 1 in 10,000 people in the Empire. He said he wouldn't tease her further, and he had an idea on how to make her not worry. They agreed that he would wear a black cat mask, and she would wear a white fox mask. The masked man asks to see the invitation. If presented, there would be no identity check. The protagonist remarked that it was quite convenient. Lena was still worried that she would make some mistake. She calmed her down, but she was actually quite nervous too. She hadn't had the chance to attend a party of this magnitude before, and she made her debut when Alika, holding her hand, led her to a large party of debutantes. Count Vincent and Alika had a strict control over her social life and tried to make sure that all the attention was drawn to the younger children. Even at the banquet after the wedding, she was inconspicuous. She only had to say hello. All because the girl didn't know how to get along with people at all. She hopes that this party will come great. The girl said that it would be better if she didn't talk in front of other people. Lena asked why, since she said it would be okay. But the protagonist said in order to get her in here. Lena asked what was going on at the auction parties. The girl knew that there was an illegal auction going on, confidential information being exchanged, and obscene things going on. But she wouldn't tell Lena about that. She replied that there was an auction going on, as well as all sorts of fun activities. She also said that it's boring. But Urania is determined, so she won't turn around and leave. They began to be noticed by other participants of the party. The girl tried to find her friend among the crowd, but for some reason she didn't see the black cat. But then she saw him dancing with some lady. Lena wanted to take a drink, but the girl took it away and said she couldn't. She said she would leave her for a while. After all, she needed to talk to Sade. She also said that if she wasn't back in an hour for Lena to go to the carriage, she also asked her again not to talk to anyone. She exchanged a glance with Sade, but suddenly she felt someone's gaze on her. She looked around but didn't see anyone. They walked down the hallway and saw a crowd. He showed her where his room was, where he conducted all the transactions. It was also where they relayed the information about her doctor. She asked him to tell her what kind of person he was. The man started to tell Phoebe Lillian she was quite a famous person in the Empire. He also said that he had worked very hard to find a wonderful doctor for the Duchess. She replied that she would reward him generously once the treatment was completed. He agreed to her terms. They entered the room. Urania said she had found her thanks to a guildmate and needed the help of a healer. Sade wished her luck, for it was not easy to persuade this healer, and left. Phoebe said there are 2 rules. You can't take off your mask, and you can't talk about your identity. She also asked what the girl was willing to offer in return for her help. She offered her 2 small bags of gold. Phoebe replied that she wasn't particularly interested in money. If she needed it, she wouldn't heal people. Urania decided to use what she sees as black shadows around people. They are actually diseases. She turned to the man in the robe, asking that this man also came for treatment. Phoebe replied that he was healthy, but the shadow near his head was thick. She thought he might be hiding the fact of his illness or not know about it at all. The girl said that Phoebe might be mistaken. Phoebe replied that she examined him yesterday and found no symptoms. She asked what her assumption of illness was based on. The girl replied that she can see if there is something wrong with a person, and also sees the diseased area as well as her own ailments. She added that Phoebe might not have found anything, since the disease had manifested itself recently. Phoebe couldn't take her word for it and asked for proof. Urania replied to have her examine her. People started to protest and said that she was just a fraud. The protagonist replied that she was telling the truth. Phoebe told the girl to come closer. She held out a bag of money in her palm. Phoebe decided to take the money as a sign that she had worked hard. The girl said the source was on the back of her head and the side of her head. Phoebe asked if she was willing to take responsibility for her words. The girl replied with confidence, because she is confident in the ability. Urania added that if she was telling the truth, Phoebe would help her. Phoebe's assistant, Janie, gave her a paper to write her address. The girl asked that the letter be without a name. She went out and began to look for her maid. She decided to wait, for if the maid was in the carriage, she would ask the coachman to stop near the mansion. She heard some strange sound and suddenly monsters appeared from the carriage. She couldn't believe her eyes. She blew the whistle, but nothing could be heard because of the wind. She wanted to try again, but she didn't need to anymore. Cassius came to the rescue and killed the monsters. She couldn't understand how he got here. He asked her how she got to the party. She replied, "I invited Sud." He began to feel like she was ruthlessly playing with his feelings all these days. The protagonist thought he was the one doing that. The girl said that he didn't need to worry because she promised not to defame his honor. She also added that he only came here because he was worried about whether she would tarnish his family's honor. He replied that honor was his birthright and it was not easy to take it away or defame it. The girl wondered if that wasn't the reason. He also added that like honor, she too belongs to him, for she is his wife. She replied that she was not a thing to belong to anyone. He meant that they made a vow to be together always. The protagonist didn't know what he was talking about at all. He noticed her shoe had slipped off. She let him put it on. While he was doing it, he said he didn't want to divorce her, because he didn't want to lose her. He wanted to become hers if suddenly she didn't want to or couldn't become his. He asked not to think about divorce anymore, because they are husband and wife of the Euclid family. The protagonist thinks that he just wants to make her his property because aristocrats behave selfishly towards other people. She realizes that getting a divorce will not be easy, so she will hide her illness from him. A friend of hers ran towards them. Cassius asked if he was the reason she brought up the divorce. He thought she loved Sade. She proved that she didn't. Sade asked what had happened here and asked if she was okay. She was angry with him and said thank you for taking him and leaving her alone, but he ignored her words. He saw Duke and asked what he was doing here. Duke replied that there were rumors about an illegal auction and he needed to check it out. He asked if Sadie knew about it. Sade said that the imperial family had forbidden him to give out details. 30 years ago, the war between humans and monsters ended, but the portals from which the monsters came out couldn't be closed. Because of this, the barriers had to be reinforced with artifacts, but even so, cracks appeared in the barriers. The Emperor has issued a decree to destroy the monsters. Therefore, catching and selling monsters at auction is equivalent to treason. The Duke said that was he really so busy that he didn't notice a monster that would easily kill a human. Sade replied to let the guards handle it. It was his job to investigate. He also added that he would appreciate it if the Duke would mind his own business. The protagonist noticed how he shows with all his appearance that he hates Cassius, yet he tries to communicate as respectfully as possible. But she wondered how he agreed to work for the imperial family. In a past life, around this time, there was a coup that resulted in the Emperor being killed by the family. Not to mention she destroyed an artifact and was locked in a tower. After that, Sade hated Cassius and tried to kill him, but ended up dying himself. But things are different now. The Duke said that had the Emperor fallen so low as to turn to a mercenary. He replied that nobles are given mostly simple jobs. Sade said that because of the Duke, he lost important evidence. Cassius replied that his friend was in danger and could have died. He replied that he could have taken care of safety himself, since he had invited her to the party. The Duke said why he hadn't. Finally, the guards arrived. Her friend escaped again with a smokescreen. The Duke sheltered her from the smoke. Urania said she was tired and she really wanted to rest. He offered to carry her. She asked if he was angry with her. He replied that he was frowning because he was thinking about how to punish the knights who were supposed to protect her. She was surprised to hear about the knights. He replied that no matter where she went, they always had to follow her. So it didn't seem to her that someone was following her. It was most likely one of the knights. They made their way to the closest manor to them. The butler of this manor was named Wenster. He ordered to show them where the bedroom was. The butler led them to the room. The bed there was a double bed. He set her on her feet and told her to rest. She asked if he was leaving. The man said yes, and told her if she needed anything to tell the servants. This reminded her of the situation after the wedding. A little later, all in tears, Lena came running to her. The heroine apologized for not letting her rest, since she can only trust her. Lena said that it was her duty to take care of her. She didn't look like she had gotten any sleep at all. She said that while she was waiting for Urania, she was surrounded by girls. The girl had no idea that she would make such an attractive young man. She wants to give her a vacation as she returns to the manor. The Duke sent a gift. Lena said there must be a dress in there. The girl opened the gift, and there was indeed a dress. She was surprised, because she didn't know Cassius liked that style. He usually preferred an elegant and neat style. The other maids said she looked marvelous. Lena was pleased that they noticed her mistress's beauty. It was the first time the girl had seen such an unusual reaction. She wondered if she would make a worthy duchess who was respected by the servants. First, she wanted to attend to the affairs of the manor, since she was with the Duke's wife. The servants here only relied on Cassius's orders, which made no one knew what to do in his absence. Not only is there no head butler in the house, there is also no head maid, because they didn't appoint them. The servants here rely entirely on Urania and Cassius, since they didn't try to take on the managerial duties themselves. She asked the butler who could pull off the position of head butler and head maid. She wanted at least 3 candidates, and she also wanted the servants to vote and choose among them at their discretion. The butler was surprised, since she wanted to leave the choice up to the servants. She replied that she would have done it herself, but she didn't know the surroundings here, so it would be better if the servants chose for themselves. The butler said they would do it. A letter was sent to her. It was from Phoebe Lillian, inviting her to visit her estate. The protagonist realized that what she had told at the party had helped her. She asked Wenster to prepare a map and bring dessert. The girl and her maid arrived at the manor. Urania noticed how friendly Phoebe had become. She thanked the girl for accepting her invitation. Her words about that man were confirmed. Phoebe asked how she could thank her. Urania asked what was wrong with the man. Phoebe replied that he had a tumor in his brain and that it was hard to diagnose, which was why she hadn't noticed anything. She abruptly dropped to her knees. This embarrassed the girl a little. Phoebe replied that because of her negligence and inattention, a man could have died. But thanks to her, he remained alive. The girl asked if she had found a cure. Phoebe replied that it was much easier than she thought. She apologized for her rudeness. Phoebe never agreed to treat any of the aristocrats, but the protagonist thinks she would have helped her without question if she had asked as Duchess Euclid. After all, the Euclid family is one of the most powerful, but she doesn't want to do that. She doesn't like the idea that she would be helped just because of the title. The girl asked when she could start her treatment. Phoebe replied that right away and asked her to sit down. Phoebe gave her a medication that would reduce the withdrawal syndrome. After she examined the girl in detail, she would be able to find a more appropriate drug. The girl thanked her. Phoebe mentioned that the man wanted to thank her. She couldn't see his face, but she could vividly feel the aura coming from him. Phoebe said that the girl had saved the life of someone important to the Empire. She handed the girl a sack, but the girl didn't want to accept it, but that was an order. Phoebe also handed the girl a pass that the man asked her to hand over. It meant that when she needed help, she could come to the Imperial Palace and show the document. Urania asked that he was from the Imperial family. Phoebe confirmed what she said, but said that it was her. It was the only princess of the Empire, Alice d'Anastasia. The girl couldn't believe what had become the benefactor of the Imperial family. Behind her were the guards who continued to hide, but she had spotted them long ago. She came to the lake where she saw the Duke. He asked what she was doing here. She replied that she had not slept, and she was worried that he would freeze. She saw something on his neck and asked him what was wrong. He told her not to come any closer, because his manic seizure was still in its active phase. She offered to go back to the house and look for a cure for the manic seizure. But he said not to worry, because after working with a sword, it can be hard to suppress. The girl couldn't imagine him having a seizure after killing monsters. She thought it was all because of her. She asked how she could help or ease the pain. He replied that he didn't know. He also said that you can give in to the lust for killing, but that won't solve the problem, because the monster will never drink blood like he was told. She asked who told him that. He replied that the former Duchess, that is, his own mother. The girl knew she wasn't like that. Perhaps he had misunderstood something. He said not to make a big deal of it, for he had broken her life. But that wasn't true. The girl remembered how much and deeply his mother had loved him. After all, even as she lay bedridden after the fire and suffered burns, she continued to worry about him. He said he hoped that his mother was not forcibly married off like other women. He also said that she cried all the time when she saw him. He's not sure, but he feels like he wasn't a welcome child. She asked if he was sure he was okay. He decided not to lie and said, not really. She asked if it was because she had touched him. He replied that it wasn't, but she shouldn't have done it often since he doesn't want to hurt her. She thinks she was wrong about him, and he was actually trying to protect her all along. She said that once she started being around him more, the manic fits started to subside. He confirmed what she said. He replied that he was not the kind of person who would tolerate someone's company to his own detriment. Suddenly, he asked if he could kiss her. She thought she had imagined it, but he repeated again. She even thought he was looking at her pleadingly. Her mind was a mess. She didn't know what she should say. She asked him to close his eyes. He interrupted and kissed her. The main character was glad she did that. She finally kissed Cassius. She turned away from him, and he was worried because she might have been sick with something. She replied that she was just dizzy. He took her in his arms and said she might have caught a cold. She saw his appearance and was embarrassed. She didn't realize if he thought she was a girl. Even in the kiss, he didn't blush in the slightest, and her heart beat fast. She remembered the softness of his lips on hers. Lying on her bed, she thought she had lost her mind. She didn't understand why she'd gone to the trouble of kissing him and letting him take her in his arms. She was sorry the kiss had been so quick. She was beginning to regret missing out on such a gorgeous moment and not enjoying it. Even though she was back at the manor, her heart was still somewhere on the shore. She stopped thinking about it and decided to get to grips with Talia's business. Lena came running to her room with the words that had been written about her in the magazine. It said that the red dress on the mysterious girl had become a fashion trend. Lena's seamstress acquaintance said that she had a lot of orders for such a dress. She also heard that not only ordered a dress of this style, but also bought jewelry. The girl couldn't believe that everyone would react to her dress like that. Lena called her stunning because the dress and jewelry matched her hair perfectly. The girl said that it was the dress that made her beautiful, not her. The maid replied that she should not belittle herself like that. Urania went to the Duke's office and was met there by his assistant, Ren. He asked her what brought her here. She replied that she wanted to meet the Duke. He told her to come in. He was sorting out some paperwork, but then he saw her. She asked if he was tired. He replied that he wasn't. She handed him a magazine and asked about the beauty of the dress. He thought the dress was too revealing. She replied that she thought it was the cutest. She replied that it was her first time going to a party, so she bought a lot of dresses. He asked if it was true that it was her first time going to a party. She replied that yes, because her parents are strict and didn't let her go anywhere. She said that she missed her debut for the same reason. She knew that Cassius had no idea that she had a bad relationship with her parents. She noticed that he was angry. He said they would have their party here at the manor. He doesn't know how to do it properly, but he told her to choose whatever outfit she wants, make up treats for the guests, and enjoy herself properly. She wanted to say that she doesn't like parties, but suddenly her cookie fell on the floor. She wanted to pick it up, but he also reached for it. Their faces were too close and she was embarrassed, causing her to quickly look away. Her face turned red and her heart was pounding really fast. She thought she was just a little scared by the manic fit Cassius had seen. He sighed and asked if she was here for a treat. She replied that she was here to talk about Talia. She added that it was about Knight Gerard. for he was making Talia steal her money. When Talia heard that he planned to expand the knight's rooms, she willingly brought him money. The rooms were improved, but the money was 1/10 of the total amount. He blew the rest of the money on booze, weapons, and obscene things. She asked if he could punish him. She sneezed, and he was about to call a doctor. She calmed him down.